So with us for this one, Brentford correspondent Jay Harris and former Premier League defender, England international defender, current Sierra Leone captain Steven Caulker. Let's just get to the details of the story first, because Jay, I still think there are a lot of football fans out there who have just heard he's been banned and don't actually understand exactly what has gone on. So take your time, go through everything that has happened that has led to him breaking Rule E8.
Yeah, this could take a little bit of time, but
it's important. It's important.
Of course, basically, this entire process started back in May last year when the FA first got in contact with Ivan Toney to say that they wanted to speak to him. They interviewed him for the first time last July. He then supplied them with some bank statements in September and October for 2 accounts. He was then interviewed by the FA again in October, and then it emerged that he had a 3rd bank account, and he had to give them his statements for his 3rd bank account. Sorry, I should have said when they initially interviewed him as well, he had to hand over his phone, so they were checking phone messages and things like that. Then obviously the FA have gone away, collected all this information, gone for his phone, gone for his bank records, as I said, and then in November, they charged him with 232 breaches of their betting rules. So the FA's betting rules basically restrict any players from England, and that applies to like coaches as well, from betting on results, transfers, managers getting hired and fired. It also covers passing on inside information. I'm sure lots of people listening might be aware of what happened with Kieran Trippier a couple of years ago, when he basically told his friends, or kind of insinuated to his friends, that he was going to be moving to Atletico Madrid from Tottenham Hotspur. They put money on that, and then he got in trouble. So the FA hit Toney with 232 charges, and then in December, they add an additional 30. And then he's obviously given time to kind of come up with a defence. And then in February, there's an update where Toney admits 190 breaches of the FA's betting rules, but he disputes 72. So when you think about the fact Toney was only officially suspended a couple of weeks ago, you know, this process was kind of ramping up back in February. So he still played another 13 games after he first admitted to all those breaches. In March, the FA withdraw 30 charges, but they say they're going to continue pursuing Toney for the remaining 42. And then basically Toney decides to admit to those 42 charges. And in the written reasons, which I'm sure we'll get onto, he basically says, I don't really agree with these charges, but I just want this process over and done with as quickly as possible now. And if this speeds up the process, then I'll do it. And then in May, he has this disciplinary hearing. And again, I'm sure we'll get onto some of the things that were said in that disciplinary hearing shortly. And then the Independent Regulatory Commission, they weigh up everything that was said, and then they hit him with this 8-month ban. And so he won't even be able to train with Brentford until September, and he won't actually be able to play football again until January next year. So I hope I've covered the main points there, because it's a complicated situation.
You have, and we'll bring Steven in just a moment, and we'll talk about the punishment as well in just a moment. But I'm sure I'm not the only one thinking, how does the FA find out about this? I mean, who sort of makes them aware? How does it come to their attention?
It's a good question, and not a lot about that process has really been revealed throughout this investigation and previous investigations. But what should be said is that the FA have betting integrity investigators. So what I'm assuming is that they're essentially tasked with, you know, finding out these bits of pieces of information, whether it's given to them by clubs who are saying, you know, we're a little bit concerned about this player's behavior, whether someone's giving them tip-offs. But as I said, the FA do have people who are kind of dedicated to looking into these types of issues.
Mark, if I can just step in there, actually. I mean, making assumptions here because I don't know the exact details of this specific case, but having been involved in something similar myself, it was the betting companies who informed the FA. Very similar to the Trippier situation, really, where my brother had told people that, oh yeah, I was going to transfer to Southampton, and yours might have been 10-1 at the time, and they've got to put a couple of grand on it. So it was a fair hefty returns. And the betting, it was Coral at the time. They contacted the FA to say there's no way anyone would have predicted that Steven was going to sign for Southampton when I was odds on to go West Brom at the time. And that was how that in that particular instance, that was how I got done. It was a betting companies not wanting to pay out and thinking, no, there must be something on here. So I can only assume it would have been fairly similar in Ivan's case.
I spoke to this maybe I was talking to a mate earlier today who supports another Premier League team, and he said, oh God, I'd love to have signed Ivan Toney this summer, but it isn't going to happen. And he then said, I feel sorry for him, but why on earth did he bet against his own team? And I kind of think, but before we go down the whole issues and what Stephen talked about, go from cocaine to ecstasy and the actual issues that are there, the public sympathy in the main is there to a certain extent, I think, because of those issues that Stephen mentioned, but it falls down a bit on the betting against your own team. Would you agree, Jay?
Yeah, so I probably should have broken down a little bit the actual bets that are explained in the written reasons. So there's 232 charges in total, and 126 were basically bets on a competition or bets on matches in competitions Toney's team were either playing in or eligible to play in. And then there were 50 of those 126 bets, bear with me with the numbers, people, that the FA considered the most serious. And some of that involved Toney betting on his team to win, betting on himself to score, and as you've just mentioned, betting on his own team to lose. It's definitely, as you've mentioned, makes people view the case slightly differently, because these FA rules are in place to kind of protect the sport's integrity. So any suggestion that a player is betting against his own team just feels as if it's tarnishing the game's image a little bit. But then it's also important context that I think Toney placed 13 bets on 7 different matches on his team to lose. 11 of those bets were on Newcastle to lose when he was out on loan at Wigan Athletic and Scunthorpe. And then the other 2 bets were related to a Wigan Athletic versus Aston Villa game where he wasn't involved in the squad. So that mitigates it slightly, but it's still not a good look to be betting against your own team. And of course, I'm sure anybody would agree, if your own player was doing that, you wouldn't feel particularly happy with it.
No, it does mitigate it, Stephen, doesn't it? And that either he wasn't at the club at the time because he was on loan, or he wasn't playing. But it's a terrible look.
It is, but I mean, I can really sympathise with him, because I know that the pain of sort of feeling rejected by your parent club, the pain of being rejected from the manager, from the starting 11, even the subs bench, and you're sort of in the stand. That sort of pain and anger and frustration.
Do you think actually what those bets are? Those bets are basically, well, I'll say it.
I would say, I go to my own experience, but I've been there, and that's I've done it. I mentioned on a podcast recently. I did that many years ago, and it was involving Newcastle, Tottenham. I'm up in the stands, and it's like there's no, I've got no control over it. It's kind of this belief from the betting companies, and I guess it's just their way of just squeezing the percentages even lower and lower and lower to give us basically no chance to win. But there's this sort of bizarre belief that as players we can control the outcome of a game. There's 21 other players on the pitch at any given time. You've got the referee, the 2 linesmen, the 4th official, and now VAR, right? There's so many things that go into any game. Like, we cannot control it, and even less so when we're not even on the pitch, even less so. So it's kind of like, for me, again, it'll make the headlines, but it's kind of, if you kind of think about it, it's like, well, I mean, let's look at horse racing. The jockeys are involved all the time, and even then, there is, obviously, as amongst us gamblers, there's no rich punter, because we're compulsive, and we continue to bet until all the money's gone. So no, for me, it was probably driven by emotion. I said I would take the logic out of it, because there is clearly no logic. And I would say, again, when you're talking about these bets, it's like, I don't know where he's at today. I don't know whether any of these bets involve Brentford in the Premier League, but I would like to think that obviously when he got to a certain level, it was like, well, I'll stop all of that, and maybe just not being able to stop. Maybe that's the case. Maybe he's doing it in the lower leagues when, let's face it, no one really cares. That's just the bottom line. It's not a story. It's not, the FA not going to ban you 8 months. It's not all of that. And then as they sort of move up levels, is it then like, wow, now I need to stop, but maybe I can't. I always look at that. I just look at what drives someone to do that. What is it? Because as I said, it's borderline sabotage, self-sabotage.
I can jump in again quickly.
Yeah.
So I should have said the 232 breaches span a 4-year period between February 2017 and January 2021. So during that time, Toney was originally at Newcastle. Then he spent some time out on loan to come for Wigan, as I mentioned. Then he moves to Peterborough, and then he moves to Brentford for that kind of final 6-7 months. But the 13 bets he placed on his teams to lose are between August 2017 and March 2018. So if you do the maths, Toney is 21 years old. And as Steven just mentioned, Toney got his big move from Northampton to Newcastle in the Premier League. And then he basically I think he made 2 substitute appearances for Newcastle and was never seen or heard of ever again. So I think that is important context to realise that this was a young player who thought he'd made it in the big time. And then all of a sudden, he's kind of been brought crashing back down to reality where he goes on loan to Wigan. And I don't have the exact stats off the top of my head. I don't think he was particularly prolific while he was out on loan at Wigan. I don't think he had the greatest time out on the pitch. He probably would have been away from his friends and family. So there's an element of this was a young, vulnerable footballer who made one mistake and then it quickly spiraled into unfortunately a negative pattern.
How do you both view the punishment, which the harsh part to me, I think, seems the no football activity at all, which takes him out of any training, and they want to implement that abroad as well. So I don't think that means he wouldn't be able to go anywhere else for 6 months. When we are talking about the mental health issues here, Steven, look, I get, there has to be some kind of punishment, but if you actually take no training, fitness, anything out of it as well, he's vulnerable, isn't he?
Absolutely. That word is the word that I would use very much to describe someone in his situation. Extremely vulnerable, most probably fragile, feeling a little fragile right now. I'd imagine he walks into Tesco's to pick up some his weekly shop of whatever. He's got people looking at him, questioning him. If he tries to go to the park, he's got the same thing. So right now, he's one of the most recognisable faces in the UK, right? So he's got all that to deal with alongside being at home, having to now find different ways to train, whether that's going to the gym or finding a personal trainer. It's a very difficult time for him to be alone. I can't understand that part of the punishment. I can't understand it. I think that we have
banned from playing is understandable, isn't he? Banned from playing is because there has to be a punishment, I suppose. I do understand that.
Absolutely, I understand that too. As I was just sort of alluding to there, like we have our consequences, right? So our behaviour has consequences, and the FA have to set an example, right? I can understand that side of it. There's no arguments there whatsoever. However, the extent of the punishment for me is a little extreme, as you mentioned there, being away from the club. Why? I mean, personally, that should be a club's decision. If the club feel that he's maybe impacting the squad, if the club feel that he'd be better at home, if the club feel that he needs therapy or needs to go to rehab, whatever, that should be a decision between him, the coach, and whoever's in charge of Brentford. It shouldn't be a decision of the FA. I feel very strongly about that. I just can't understand why isolating someone in any way, shape, or form is going to help them. He still can't play, so you've kind of already made the punishment. I would like to see that punishment explained and also put into context, because I know there's a lot of other punishments that have gone on that have been nowhere near as severe. So consequences, yes, I believe we will have to face them in life. But he's messed up, and I'm sure he knows that. And with that comes the consequences. But they're for me they're a bit extreme and also strange.
I'll jump in at this point. I think what would have been quite powerful in this situation is if part of Toney's punishment is for him to, not only be put on an educational course where he sits down with somebody and kind of explains his experiences. And of course, it is mentioned in the written reasons that he will now be going through some therapy sessions, some counselling sessions. But if he then went into clubs and was kind of very open about his story and trying to explain to the next generation of players, don't make the same mistakes as I did, I think that would be a better look for the whole of football. But also, I was obviously at the game on Sunday when Brentford beat Manchester City. Ivan Toney was sat in the director's box. And you had this really strange moment at the end of the game, and there's a photo doing the rounds on social media. And if you guys haven't seen it, I'll send it to you afterwards. And if anybody's listening's not seen it, I encourage you to look it up. Brentford have just finished 9th in the Premier League. Their club captain, Pontus Jansson's leaving after 4 years. Thomas Frank is doing a speech on the pitch. Pontus Jansson does a speech on the pitch. They do a lap of honour. And Toney was stood in the tunnel because he couldn't go out on the pitch. And that just felt a little bit wrong after an incredible season where he's been called up for England for the first time. He scored 20 goals. As I said, of course, there needs to be a punishment, but to not even be allowed to kind of, wave goodbye to the fans because you're not going to play in front of them for 8 months, I think just jars with me a little bit. And then in terms of football related activity, it's so vague. Toney's out with a hamstring injury at the moment. Is he allowed to go to the training ground for rehab? From what I understand, I think he is, but if you actually look up football related activity, there's no, what's the word, like guidelines, there's no rules. It's all a little bit vague. I think Brentford pretty much have to ask for advice on almost a case by case basis. Can we send someone to go and do gym work with Ivan Toney, or is he going to have to hire his own PT, go down to the local gym and do it, which I think Steven just mentioned. It just seems all a little bit bizarre, if I'm honest. And again, I get that he needed a punishment, but the whole ban from football-related activity and the whole ban from going and being allowed to train until September, it doesn't seem very well thought out. It doesn't seem very conducive. Yes, there needs to be a punishment, but actually what this individual needs, because he has been diagnosed with a gambling addiction, is some sort of rehabilitation. And I don't think the FA's punishment really addressed that.